if Governor Palin and I are elected in 49 days, we're not going to waste a moment in changing the way Washington does business. And we're going to start where the need for reform is greatest. In short order, we're going to put an end to the reckless conduct, corruption, and unbridled greed that have caused a crisis on Wall Street. We're going to put a stop to it. The working people of the state of Florida and this nation are the most innovative, the hardest working, the best skilled, most productive, most competitive in the world. And this foundation of our economy, the American worker, is strong, but it's been put at great risk by the greed and mismanagement of Wall Street and Washington. I'll give you some straight talk, my friends. The top of our economy is broken. We've seen self-interest, greed, irresponsibility, and corruption undermine the hard work of the American people. It's time to set things right, and I promise to get the job done as your president. You know, Americans put a lot of trust in the bankers and brokerage firms of Wall Street. They depend on the financial service sector to protect their savings, IRAs, 401ks, and pension accounts. But many leaders in finance have proven unworthy of that trust. Government has a clear responsibility to act in defense of the public interest, and that's exactly what I intend to do. We're going to make sure that Americans' accounts are protected. I pledge that the FDIC and the SBIC will have all the support they need to fully back the savings of the American people. Too many people on Wall Street have been recklessly wagering instead of making the sound investments we expected of them. And when their companies collapse, it seems only the CEOs escape the consequences. While employees, shareholders, and other victims are left with nothing but trouble and debt, the people who helped cause the collapse make off with tens of millions in severance packages. Disgraceful. I've spoken out against the excess of corporate executives, and I can assure you that if I'm president, we're not going to tolerate that anymore. In my administration, we're going to hold people on Wall Street responsible, and we're going to enact and enforce reforms that make sure that these outrageous, and they are outrageous, never happen in the first place. Too many people on Wall Street have forgotten or disregarded the basic rules of sound finance. In an endless quest for easy money, they dreamed up investment schemes that they themselves don't even understand. While their derivatives, credit default swaps, and mortgage-backed securities, they tried to make their own rules, but they could only avoid the basic rules of economics for so long. Now, as their schemes unravel in bankruptcies and collapse, it's once again the public who is left to bear the costs. And I promise you that on my watch, we are never going to let these kinds of abuses go uncorrected or unpunished. Too many practices on Wall Street have been kept hidden from public view to buy time and postpone the inevitable reckoning. Bad investments were made even worse, and risks allowed to multiply by keeping them off the books. Derivatives, mortgage-backed securities, and other complicated instruments often disguised foolish investments and were sold to insurance companies, pension funds, mutual funds, banks, and individuals. when the housing markets collapsed and the values of these securities went way down, our banks couldn't pay their debts. We saw Bear Stearns collapse, followed by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. More recently, Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy, and a troubled Merrill Lynch was sold to Bank of America in order to survive. And now we have other banks and insurance companies at risk. So much of the loss and damage to our economy could have been avoided if these practices had been exposed to the light of day. People have a right to know when their jobs, pensions, investments, and our whole economy are being put at risk by the recklessness of Wall Street. And under my reforms for the financial sector, that fundamental right will be and must be protected. Too many firms on Wall Street have been able to count on casual oversight by regulatory agencies and government. And there's so many of these regulators that the responsibility for oversight is scattered, unfocused, and ineffective. Among others, we've got the SEC, the CFTC, the FDIC, and the SBIC, and the OCC. The alphabet soup is there. But for all their big and impressive sounding names, the fact is they haven't been doing their job right, or else we wouldn't have these massive problems on Wall Street, and that's a fact. At their worst, they've been caught up in Washington turf wars instead of working together to protect investors in the public interest. And we don't need a dozen federal agencies doing the job badly. We need the best federal agencies to do the job right. Under my reforms, the American people will be protected by comprehensive regulations that will apply the rules and enforce them to the full. There will be constant access to the books and accounts of our banks and other financial institutions. By law, it will reduce the debt and risk that any bank can take on. And above all, I promise reforms to prevent the kind of wild speculation that could put our markets at risk and has already inflicted such enormous damage across our economy. 2 years ago, I warned the administration and the Congress that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac needed to be fixed, and it turns out that the problem was even bigger. They waited too long. And now we have a housing crisis, 3 bailouts with taxpayers' money, and a financial crisis. As for the Congress, members in both parties must accept a share of the responsibilities. Some members seem to measure the financial health of banks and lenders by the size of their political contributions instead of the extent of their debt. They listen to the lobbyists instead of the accountants. I can promise you, the days of dealing in special favors will soon be over. In a McCain-Palin administration, the public interest will always come first.